Hi, I'm Sunya, and I'm the host of the Creatrix Connection podcast. Thank you for joining me on this journey to explore what it means to be a woman, a mother, and a creative soul. For many years, I've spun my wheels as a freelancer and creative entrepreneur. Since I was a kid, it was always my dream, but I completely lost myself somewhere along the way until I got to a point where it felt like I was creating, even sometimes living for everyone but myself. I became uninspired and disconnected from my purpose, and that's where my journey with soul work started, and my search for the goddess. Since then, I've been unraveling the shadow stories I was telling myself, often rooted in shame, passed down through advertising, culture, family beliefs, religion. The goddess was nowhere to be seen in these realms. So where was she? Well, it turns out she was within me all along, in my stillness, my poetry, my art, my movement, my sacred cycles. She was in my very being. It was then that I realized my purpose is that I'm here to remember her in each moment, embody her more every day, and tell her story. The goddess, the creatrix, has been silenced for too long. Now it is time to listen and share her wisdoms and teachings experienced through my life and the lives of creative women everywhere. We are doing this through the Creatrix Connection. So, thank you again for joining me on this journey as we explore her story. Hello everyone, this is Sunya, and I'm so excited to be here with you today as your host of the Creatrix Connection podcast. This is going to be our first episode here in October. It's my birth month, and that's just the month for me that is full of inspiration, and it's like a new start. So I'm just really excited to re-emerge from my cocoon. I just gave birth to a beautiful baby daughter named Isabella, and I've been kind of disconnected from the world for these few months. I feel like I've been in a state of rebirth, and so now I'm excited to emerge from that, peek out of the soil, and say hello to you all via podcast. I'm excited to be doing this with my good friend Kendra. We've had so many amazing conversations about astrology and goddesses and archetypes and symbolism. So as I was writing up some themes and topics and inspirations for this podcast, she just kept popping into my mind, and I was like, you know what, I need to bring in my buddy for this experience. And so Kendra has 40 years of astrology experience. She is a consultant. She's been studying and teaching about archetypes of astrology, especially related to the goddesses, how those are connected with the movements of the sky, these stories of these goddesses, these archetypes. And so Kendra can expand upon this much better than I can. So welcome, Kendra.
Thank you, my friend Sunya. I'm delighted to be here and to talk about this. This is my passion, because at a certain point in studying astrology, because when I first began, there was very limited things available to me as positive images for women. If you know anything about astrology, we were pretty much restricted to the moon and Venus, which doesn't give you anywhere to go if you're trying to be active in the world and, for example, start a business or a podcast. And that would be the province of Mars, the warrior energy. So, how do we find symbols and images for that speak to women? Well, what I discovered through the years, actually, is that they're in the entire sky. The goddess is alive and well, living in all the zodiac signs, and these archetypes are available to all of us to connect with. And when we hear the stories, it awakens, I believe, parts of ourselves that we know deeply, but maybe we haven't expressed yet, but we can get a little help expressing them by knowing some of the elements of their stories. You don't have to be a scholar or read myth forever. You can know the stories on the simplest level, and whatever piece speaks to you in your heart, you'll know that's the part you need to pay attention to.
I love that. Yeah, that just totally aligns with my inspiration behind the goddesses and also behind astrology. And taking an approach to astrology that moves away from the fear and superstition that can be related to it. For instance, like, oh, don't do this on Mercury retrograde. All of that fear-based thought, and moving more towards astrology as a source of reflection, an opportunity to move through the cycles of the earth, of the planets, and the cycles of the self. And as we move through these, piecing together relatable stories that we can pull inspiration from as we move through our own lives. And so, as I've explored these different goddess mythologies throughout the years, I love to pull them into my own life through the seasons, through that context. And so that is my main inspiration and purpose with that. And so, on that note, the theme of this episode was the theme of the inner fire. What lights us up? What brings that spark into our heart and inspires us to come to life? And this couldn't be a more appropriate time to talk about this, as I have started this podcast. I was tuning in with my own self, and just, in this period of rebirth, becoming a mom, I feel like I'm a new person. I have a new identity, and I'm wondering, okay, like, in this new place, outside of course, my family and my daughter, which totally lights me up, what else is gonna really bring me back into my true self right now? And I just thought, I want to have these conversations around things I'm passionate about. And I want to keep that fire lit. And I thought, well, if I can just commit to doing that once a week to keep that conversation going, that will feed my inner flame no matter what is going on in my life. And there have been a lot of things going on in my life, and they've been feeding that fire. And that is the reason I'm here today with you.
One of the things I love about astrology is I feel like it sparks these creative conversations in us if we look at what the planets are doing, because it's a guide, so it can spark and ignite these deeper passions and questions in yourself and give you some guidance. And we're right in sync with that right now, because we've just had this very powerful Aries full moon. And Aries is the initial spark of life that starts the zodiac, starts life, lights us up. It's spontaneous, it's energetic, it has its own, if you follow a flame, it has its own path. Mm-hmm. So we're right in sync with that rhythm right now.
Yeah, I mean, that is like the archetype right now that I've been revisiting, is like, what is this Aries energy? This almost childlike energy, where it's just like, all right, let's do it. We'll figure out the details later, right?
Yes, that's very Aries, right. Course correct after you started it going, but just get it going.
Messy action.
Right. My Aries mother actually used to say, just do something, even if it's wrong. And that's the spirit behind it. Just do it.
Yeah.
You'll find out later what it's all about.
Oh my gosh. So that is the energy of this first episode of the podcast. And we're doing it. We're here. What kind of action can we take around our inner fire right now? You've heard, the action that I have taken in my life, but as you listening at home now, tuning into your own inner fire, what feels inspiring to you right now? What is one thing that you could do that would bring that light into your life, bring that play into your life? Especially, as children, we didn't even have to think about that. We just knew, I want to, go to the park, or I want to play with my toy, or, it's just so intuitive. So how can we tune into that inner flame, that inner child that just is ready to go? what is the first thing that is going to bring life to you? You know, I want to go see the sunset. You know, I want to build a sandcastle.
And one thing I think is important too, and we can tune in the moon on this, because we just had a full moon. Now we're in the light is dimming or waning, as they say, going toward the new moon. So it's kind of a releasing time. So you can just live in the question. You don't have to know the answer. And I think that's very freeing, especially for women. A lot of times, coming off of all the pressures that everyone has in daily living to do this, that, and the other thing, and survive and make money and be mothers, or be CEOs of their company, or whatever they're doing. There's a tremendous pressure to well, I gotta know the next thing. And this is a different kind of energy available to us.
Yeah, it's more like a surrendering, a removing of all of these layers, of all these expectations. Because I could understand it when you listen to that. You're like, what's my inner flame? I don't know. Oh, God.
Yeah.
There's so much pressure to know.
Yes.
And instead of putting all that pressure on our minds to do that work, to know, it's more of like a heart-centered action,
Very much.
where it's like, what just feels, what are we feeling right now? That tuning into that heart energy, that like taking all of those layers of expectation and just taking them off and taking a moment to breathe,
Yes, very important. Right.
Huh.
Entering that sacred space where you just don't know. And what you become more adept at, maybe this is the idea of crone wisdom, actually, is to become the people that, and you can access this at any age, any gender, any time. It's a piece or a type of wisdom to live in the question, to become more adept at asking the right questions, rather than that awful pressure to know all the answers.
Yes.
Because we are on such a precipice of change in the entire planet. So why would we think, as human beings, that we would know all of the answers right now?
Yeah.
We can't actually access all of it. Some of this is faith and stripping away the layers. And this is jumping ahead a little bit. But I'm just going to tell a teeny piece of the story that relates to this Aries moon, about the fire goddess, Bridget, who's very well known in Ireland, and there's many stories about her. So you don't have to know the whole story, and there's going to be certain elements that you might gravitate to or find more relevant. But the piece of it that I'm remembering now is, if you think of this journey of going into yourself and letting go and releasing that we're just touching on the edge of, the end story is, of course, she's going to come back transformed in the spring. People are more familiar with that as like Persephone's return in the spring. But in Celtic Irish mythology, Bridget is the sister of the goddess who falls into the underworld. And at one point in the story, she decides she's going to rescue her sister. And she is armed with knowledge. She's a great goddess of wisdom. But what she does is she jumps on her big white horse and rides into the underworld with her body lighting the way. So it's a tremendous image of power, spontaneity, fire, light, and I'm sure she didn't really exactly know every step of the way where she was going. And that's, I feel like, part of what the energy that's invoked or evoked by the Aries moon, because we have a lot of association with the masculine warrior energy. But we have a lot of powerful, warrior energies of women and goddesses available to us also.
I love that. Oh my gosh, thank you so much for sharing about Bridget. It's true. When I think of Aries, I do tend to think of a more masculine archetype here.
Right.
But that is not the only one.
Right. There's plenty of warrior goddesses.
Yes.
Especially in Celtic Irish mythology. They charge down the hill with warrior
leading.
cries. Yes, leading the battles. Right. So there's, a lot of different. And this, I think this is relevant now, just, again, in the astrology in the skies, because Chiron, which is, I don't know what to call it, asteroid, planetoid, it carries the symbolism, many things, maverick, but of the wounded healer. So it's occurring right near that full moon.
Okay.
So one of the ways you can talk about in the culture is the wound of identity politics, and people striving to find their own identities and be identified for their own uniqueness. And so if we think about this in terms of women, one of the things that's been really wounded in ourselves is our fire energy, our capacity to act on our own behalf. Aries has a big reputation for being pretty selfish. It's all about me, myself, and me. So, but it also is enlightened self-interest. It comes from that spontaneous inner knowing of who I am and where I'm going. And I'm going.
Yeah, advocating for ourselves, right?
Yes, exactly. So that's both when Chiron's in the field, in the energy field as it is now, I feel like you see both the increased capacity maybe to feel the wound. Oh, I can't do that because whatever. We have a million reasons. But it's also the increased capacity to be healed and to provide healing to others. And we can see it lots of ways to reflect it in culture as well as our own personal lives.
Yeah. And like releasing those identities that no longer serve us, right? Like as part of that healing process.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Just saying, okay, this was an identity that someone told me I needed to be at a young age. If I didn't hold that identity, I wouldn't survive. But now, 10, 20 years later, is that identity still relevant? Is that voice that is speaking to me still something I need to listen to and act upon? Maybe not. Right. And so this is a great opportunity to let those voices come up and surface and say, I hear you, but it's no longer time for me to act upon you. You're not
I like that.
An advisor for me anymore. It doesn't mean that voice isn't valid. That voice came from a place that happened, and we, it perhaps even served us for some time. But recognizing, when it's a moment, it's like, okay, this is no longer serving me anymore. And especially, if you're going through a huge transformation like I have, there are a lot of voices that I am listening to and saying, maybe now those aren't voices that I need anymore. Especially becoming a mother, I'm learning to intuitively navigate that motherhood journey. And
as everyone else is busy giving you lots of advice, I'm sure.
Everyone has lots of beliefs and opinions about motherhood, and I am learning how to take those, hear them, and pull out what feels right for me and right for my family. And some of them I'm giving them a try, and other ones it's just like it's not aligned for me, and I recognize that. And also it's definitely been a journey of slowing down, and it's been such a blessing. And so that identity that I used to have of like doing everything fast and just getting it done and doing a million things, where now it's like, okay, maybe 2 things I'm gonna do today.
There you go. Now you're moving at my speed.
Yeah, but those 2 things I'm doing with like my full heart.
Right.
I'm doing with every fiber of my being. I'm like, I have 30 minutes. I'm going to make this the best 30 minutes of me time that I can. Right. And so it's really been a blessing because my time has become so much more valuable. I've been able to focus so much more presence into it.
Right. Well, these things that appear to impede us or wound us, bring those gifts. It can make us much more present to what is. And there's another thing about the wounding healing process I think is important to tune into too. And people like Clarissa Estes and even psychologist James Hillman talk about, which is hearing the metaphor or the deeper voice in the wounding process. We're pretty quick to attach meaning to it or dismiss it or, ultra heroically false heroism to rise above it. Again, we're moving, doing, going too fast. But sometimes it tells us something about who we really are. And then it's okay. And it can become reconfigured in our current life in a different way. Does that make sense? Clarissa Essays actually talks about, we develop these scars from things that have wounded us, and she talks about wearing our scars with pride. Because, there's two things about life. None of us are making it out alive, and none of us are perfect.
Yeah.
And we learn every day from all of the things we do that we get right, and we just don't get so right.
Well, I think that ties perfectly in with depth work.
Yes.
I have been working with the creative depth coaching approach for 3 years now, and that is exactly what it is. Instead of being in the state of victimhood, which some people might associate with wearing your, wounds and your scars out.
Yeah, that's another way to do it.
That's one way, but instead of doing that, we're actually taking these experiences that have wounded us, and we're using them as an opportunity to transform and become our most enlightened self from this sometimes tragic experience.
Yeah.
And I've had one of the most difficult years of my life, and it's been amazing how these tools have helped me to take these really dark experiences at times and turn them into something that provides meaning and sustenance for my soul. And I mean, personally, love the archetype of the death and the rebirth and the life. So I am in my element with these themes. But in-depth work, that's what it's all about, is saying, okay, I am hitting rock bottom. Perfect.
Yes, because it is perfect. In fact, that's a line from one of the famous myths of going to the underworld. The ways to the underworld are perfect in every way.
Yes.
It's one of the little creatures' voices to the great goddess of the underworld who suddenly shows up at the gates of the underworld.
Yeah.
Goddess of the upper world, excuse me.
And, tying back in with what we said before about this pressure to know it all, the goddess is the opposite end of that wisdom, where it's like, let us rest in the unknown mysteries and listen for their wisdoms, to be present with these really heavy experiences, and through that presence, receive the wisdom of their unfolding.
Yeah.
That experience is the wisdom, and not necessarily getting so in our head about like, oh, what does this mean and how can I pull apart all the separate meanings, just like being present with the experience and going in and being with it. And in the case of creative depth coaching, creating art around it and taking that art and taking that visual integration and that understanding that this creatrix consciousness is providing us, and integrating it into the story of our lives. And so that's what I love about astrology and how it ties in with all of this, is that we are creating our own stories.
Well, I have to stop you for a minute because now this is a very spontaneous, unplanned plug from my friend Sunya, but I have been her client with the creative depth coaching, where I was going through a very, very difficult situation and losing my partner, and it was a lot of other things, money, name it, I was losing it. And I did a process with her, working with different, very difficult emotions and using collage. And it was extremely powerful, and it really helped me move the energy in a way that I know that any kind of verbal work it just wouldn't have touched it. But it was, you had to enter the unknown. It was very intuitive, it was very unconscious. It was, as you actually engage in the process, it's astoundingly healing in a way that I hope I'm giving credit to. Because it was very profound. This is real true stuff.
Thank you, Kendra.
And we didn't even get quote unquote done.
It's
I'm
never
very
done.
slow.
It's never done.
Yeah.
And we're learning that we have different paces throughout our lives. There's times when you're very active and you're getting a lot done, and there's seasons when the work is sometimes painfully slow. And of course, our culture doesn't necessarily understand that. There's only one pace, and it's, full on and upward.
Right.
But thank you, for sharing that. And, I found that, it's inspired by my own journey of creating art from a young age where, I realized there's something wrong with the world. And I started creating
You're
art
like the
about
voice
it.
of Scorpio. One of the Scorpio myths is Cassandra. You're like the voice of Cassandra. It says, "Oh, Troy is burning," and they're like, "Oh, Cassandra, take a break. We don't see anything burning." Well, guess what? There was really something wrong at the time.
Yeah, I just sensed that things have run awry, to
Yes.
say the very least. It was affecting my own personal life, and even some of the adults in my life that are supposed to be guiding me, I'm seeing that they're kind of misguided in their own ways as well, and it was affecting me. And all of the feelings that I'm having aren't necessarily all positive, but when I was able to put it onto a canvas and say, like, it's not inside of me, it's outside of me, and this is what it looks like and this is what it feels like, it helps me process it. Much better than any of the medications that were suggested to me.
It could speak to you.
Yeah. And so by connecting with these darker energies, it actually provided me a sense of relief, and it provided me a sense of empowerment that I could have a relationship with these energies, and I could transform them into their higher, more evolved self, because I found that every dark energy is actually like a piece of coal that has a gift for us that can be turned into gold, like the
Yes.
alchemists speak.
Well, that's exactly what I was thinking about as you were speaking. We're really all modern day shamans and alchemists.
Yes.
Because we don't have the ancient tribal structures. I mean, those of us living in, we live in St. Pete, Florida. So, I mean, there were shamans here before us, but I'm not a Native American lineage. I'm a white girl from the suburbs of Chicago. But we're all working now with, and astrology tells us this story in the sky big time, the emerging, we could call it the emerging global human archetype. It's evolving, it's growing, it's changing. We're creating it as we go along. We identify this and associate it a lot with, the emerging Aquarian era. There was a lot of chat about that at the beginning of 2022 when the planets Jupiter and Saturn came together in the sign of Aquarius. And many people were like, "Oh, it's the Aquarian age," so we were all ready to celebrate.
Okay,
that.
so
Perfect.
to wrap
I don't
up
think it's
all of
quite been
these
like that in
themes
2022,
together, we have
because
the
there's a little bit of a journey
full moon
here
in
to go
Aries,
through
which
it.
we spoke about, which is
Referring to
this
here
theme of
poignantly and
lighting our inner
it's a
fire,
guide,
getting in
it's a
touch
guide.
with
How do we
that
do
inner
that?
child,
we're entering
tuning in with our identity,
astrologically
and
really
weaving this
significant
story of who we are,
heading
taking
into
the
new
full
moon.
spectrum of our
It's
experiences,
because it's
the
solar
darkness and the light, and alchemizing it, transforming it into this
in ancient times
you know,
they were the
canvas of
timekeepers.
our life, of ourself, and who we are.
Ordinary
We're in
time,
control of it. We are the
Stretch
artists of
day
our
and
life.
night.
Yeah.
The sun is the
And
day,
so now we're in this
So
kind
what
of
does that mean when you're
waning period. We're waning
season.
into the new moon, and
it's
so
a time of change.
as you said, during this time,
Things only change
we
when
are
a little bit into that. Not a little bit.
surrendering. We're releasing
Creative
layers of
chaos.
self. We're releasing
So I
layers
feel
of
like you're
identity that are no
speaking
longer
to
serving.
people.
But we're also not trying too hard to figure it all out right now. We are
and just
being
present
tuning in,
with
we're listening, we're shedding,
all of it.
we're preparing
With all of it.
for this
holding
new
space
moon.
for all of it.
We're
Not just the
clearing
darkness, but
our
also
mind.
like our biggest dreams.
So
Exactly.
tension
And so it's like we're
can
pulling
emerge
from
from
the
that
depths
space.
of
I like that.
Yeah,
I like
yeah.
that. It's
and
a really it fits the astrology of the
profound
moment because we have this big
transformations, and
air
also
energy
pulling
through
from
some of the planets, and
highest
air is that
self that
element
we can
of the
imagine,
mind,
that
and using the
I
mind
am
properly to
capable
meditate, to
my
clear
dreams.
out,
I
to
can do
you
this,
know, perceive
I
what's
don't
really
know
true,
how,
what isn't, rise
but
above the
I'm
noise,
surrendering
so to
my
speak,
need to know how,
and let-
but
just
through
let it
the
happen.
wisdom of the
as we're in
creations of
the
the
Libra
goddess.
season
Surrendering
too,
my
so
need and I'm trusting
finding that
in the
those
process.
elements of
And I'm
personal
allowing.
balance.
allowing. I think that's a
And
really good word to use.
I know
Yeah.
Because the
we,
you that's
we
gonna
actually
do-
were touching
need that
upon
change
Mott
is not the you
earlier,
that's
and
sitting
I'd
here
kind of
right
like
now.
to interject that.
Oh yeah, she's another Libra goddess associated with that time of the seasons because all the stars and constellations and stories and zodiac signs in that part of the sky are about descent and death and going into the deeps. And so she is from ancient Egyptian mythology, Maat. She is often presented with a winged goddess with these scales in front of her. And that comes down to us as the scales of Libra. But what she's doing is weighing the human heart against the feather. It's like a day of judgment. So when you appear before her, you have to say all these things about, what you didn't do in your life. I didn't lie, I didn't cheat, I didn't steal. So it's a kind of an inventory taking time. So we can be doing a bit of that right now, I feel, without subjecting ourselves to that kind of critical, harsh human judgment where we just over-criticize everything we did. And we just know that, the point is to become more pure of heart so that we can carry whatever it is our intention as we become these alchemists and shamans of modern times. Where do we want to end up? What intention am I carrying? And know that it's okay that you're not there and you're not that.
Yeah.
You're not the goddess Mot. She is. We're the humans, and we get to be imperfect and flawed and make our mistakes, because the person who's going to, if you wonder how you're going to do this next thing, that person who's going to do all that, she's not the person that's sitting here now. She's going to be somebody different, so it's okay. It's all right. You got a process to go through.
She's within the lineage of that person.
Yes, right. She's in there. She's in you in some manner, but you don't have to, I think that's a lot of when fear holds us back. Oh my God, I can't do that. I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, how can I be that person?
Yes.
Yeah.
But your dreams are always bigger than where you are in the moment. That's just how it goes.
Yeah. Just trusting that where we are right now holds that potential, holds that next step, and we don't have to know it all. And that's why I love these goddess myths and I resonate with them so much, is because they hold that wisdom of trusting in the unknown and trusting in our intuition. Take these bits of inspiration from Mott and from Bridget and weaving them into our own stories in our own ways, and pulling inspiration from them like that. We are bringing that elements of balance and weighing of the scales. We're preparing for the descent into Scorpio.
And there's always a goddess in these stories that knows the way. And like in Greek mythology, she's represented as Hecate.
Yes, the
Demeter, the mother, Demeter, who's depressed because she can't find her daughter, goes to Hecate, where's my daughter? And in the traditional telling of it, Hecate says, well, let's go to Helios. He's the sun. There's plenty of sun goddesses if you need a sun goddess.
Yeah.
But basically that light of consciousness. So let's go to Helios. He knows what happened. We'll find out. We'll shed some light on it. So that light, which can come from, because I believe this is in the astrology and in the air through a number of images we have with the planet Uranus, which represents change and is said to be associated with Aquarius, is to collaborate with like-minded people who will show you another facet of the light. And allow the collective genius, that's the Aquarian gift, that collective genius to emerge. It's okay if you only have a piece of the light. You can talk to your friends who are on the journey.
Yeah, we don't have to have it all figured out once again.
Right, exactly.
We can become more interdependent.
Yes, exactly. And we could probably have a lot more fun.
Yes.
Because humor is a huge piece of these journeys to the underworld. Yeah.
And in this new moon coming up, we have these eclipses, correct?
Right. Which are big changes.
Yes.
They set a tone for the next 6 months. So it's kind of like a super new moon. So at new moons, you start things, just very simply. It's a very practical guide. At new moons, you start things, you get them going, you seed your intentions, you see about building or changing or moving things into beingness. When you reach the full moon, which we already did on October 9th in Aries, that's a culmination point. Something's revealed. Everything's in the light of the full moon, and that's when you start releasing, letting go, finishing up. On a practical note, it's like, clean your desk, clean your house. Or just, declare a few things done,
Mm-hmm.
and they're over and they're ending, and you don't have to do any more about that.
Mm-hmm.
And to the next cycle. And just clear the decks, get things out of the way.
Yeah.
So.
And then these eclipses, it's like a lot of upheaval, a lot of change. So we're just kind of preparing for that. We're tuning into our own individual spark. We're releasing what's no longer serving. We're tuning into the scales of balance, into that self-care. And
self-care is not an option anymore. I think you said
right.
that to me. It's really important. That's a Aries theme, and I think it's also what will carry us through these eclipses and these times of change, because we have to accept we have growing pains now, and the world is changing. We're at a tipping point. The new is on its way, and it's actually already arrived, and it's just a matter of, are we going to wake up to it?
We're just integrating it at this point.
That's right.
And if we don't integrate it, then it's going to keep coming around the wheel and smacking us in the face over and over again.
Right. And we have a couple of years here where that's what we'll be doing, integrating these brand new paradigms and shifts and change. And the themes of this eclipse, tied together by the signs of Taurus and Scorpio, what they share. I mean, we could joke about it and say they're the signs of money, sex, and power. Well, these hit close to home. And they also talk to us about what do we value. So that's what we can be doing if we want some reflection, contemplation on what the upcoming theme of the eclipse is. It's to just have that question, what is it that I really value?
Yeah, what?
Because your unconscious will just go to work on the question, and it will emerge.
Yeah, and I mean, I love to explore that through the artistic process.
Yes.
Pulling out images that come forth when I just I just present the question, and then I just pick out images, and I don't think too hard about why I'm picking them out,
right,
or
right.
what they have to do with it. But I just take the images out of the magazines or out of the art books or National Geographic, and I just kind of sit with them for a little while before I pull them together into a little piece.
I love that, because that's a little different take on vision boards. Because I think sometimes there's a lot of talk about vision boards, and then I think sometimes people might be creating them. Not that there's anything wrong with this, but sometimes it doesn't seem as appropriate to create them so intentionally. Where you're talking about this process of having the question and then letting the images speak to you, right?
Yeah,
Am I
and
getting that?
letting the subconscious speak.
Yeah.
I think the subconscious speaks more clearly through images.
Oh, yes.
And it's not. It's open to interpretation, and they can speak in so many different ways
Right.
and angles.
Right.
And through the creative depth coaching approach, we create, rather than a big board, we create smaller canvases, like cards.
Oh, yes. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And then you go back to them too, right? Because they're still speaking to you, I'm imagining.
Oh yeah, it's a part of our story we're weaving in. So some of the cards are darker shadow work, some of the cards are lighter, some of them are archetypal guides that are presenting themselves.
Mm-hmm, right.
And
but you might not realize it till later on. Is that am I getting this right?
That can be the case. Yeah. And also, working with emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Working with so many different elements, and of course values. Value work is a huge part of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if these are things that you're interested in and you're so nerdy like Kendra and I, I am opening up a few spaces for some one-on-one coaching again. And if you're interested in learning more about that, please consider visiting my website or just reaching out to me personally. And I'd love to actually just have a conversation with you. I'd love to schedule a time to have a phone call and just learn more about where you are in your life and how I might be able to help.
I think that's very valuable. The art of conversation.
Yeah.
And being able to do that in this era of overly aggressive social media that has instant answers for everything.
I'm trying to unplug from the phone time and the computer time as much as possible, and so if I can have those one-on-one conversations, those are so valuable to me. And that's also why I like the podcast, because we can just have these, we could listen and tune in without having to have our eyes on the screen.
Oh, nice idea.
Yeah. So, it's just such a gift to have you here, Kendra.
Thank you. It's been my honor. It's been great fun.
Yes, and I'm so glad that we can be reunited here to continue our stories about the goddess, our conversations about all of these things that light us up. And, I just also want to say thank you to everyone that has tuned in for this first episode here. What a celebratory moment to connect with that inner spark within you, connect with that inner fire, and take an action today that lights you up, even if it's just a little action. You deserve it.
Thank you so much for listening to this first episode of the Creatrix Connection podcast. Be sure to sign up for my online newsletter on my website, sunyasoulwork.com, to be notified every week when we release a new episode on Sundays. Next week, stay tuned for a meditation inspired by the new moon as we make the descent into the wisdom of our own being and shed the layers that no longer serve us as we rest in stillness and allow our intention for this new moon to come forth and reveal itself. So I'll see you then. Thank you and happy Sunday.